What if I told you that the scariest part of Jeffrey Epstein's story is not just what he was accused of doing, but how he built a system that made powerful people feel safe around him and made institutions treat him like he was untouchable? When people hear Epstein, they often picture a single villain with a private jet and a private island. But the more useful way to understand this is as a business model, a machine that turned money, access, and secrecy into leverage. And that model is worse than most people think, because it wasn't built on genius investing. It was built on being the middleman between power and desire, and then collecting the price. This video is an explainer about how Epstein's wealth and influence worked based on public reporting, court filings, and widely documented parts of his timeline. Some details are still disputed, and many allegations remain allegations, so we're going to be careful. We will separate what is confirmed from what is claimed. The goal here is not gossip. The goal is to understand the incentives and the structure, because once you see the structure, you start noticing how similar systems can exist in other places too. So, who was Jeffrey Epstein, and how did he go from obscure to billionaire adjacent, with connections across politics, business, academia, and celebrity culture? Epstein was born in 1953 and did not complete a traditional elite path that would normally explain access to the richest circles on Earth. Yet by the 1990s and 2000s, he was living like a mega-wealthy financier. Prime real estate, staff, security, international travel, and a social network that looked like a who's who of high status. The obvious question is, what did he sell? Most people assume he sold investing skill, but the more you look, the less that explanation satisfies. There is no long public track record of a fund that he ran, no clear list of institutional investors, no famous set of trades credited to him. His public identity was financial advisor, but the details behind that label are unusually murky. A key, well-documented relationship in Epstein's rise was his connection to retail billionaire Les Wexner, founder of what became L Brands, the company behind Victoria's Secret and other major retail brands. Epstein operated in Wexner's orbit for years and gained extraordinary trust and privileges, including major control over financial matters. Over time, Epstein's status changed from some guy with a job to a guy whose phone call gets returned, and in elite circles, that's the real currency. Here's the first pillar of the model: credibility by association. If you can convincingly say, "I work for this billionaire," or "I advise that billionaire," many doors open without you having to prove anything else. People assume you were vetted. They assume you have resources. They assume you understand the rules of their world. In other words, one powerful sponsor can function like a certification stamp for the rest of society. Now add the second pillar, controlled access. Epstein positioned himself as someone who could connect important people to other important people, not in a random networking way, but in a curated way. Think of it like this: if you are wealthy and powerful, you do not just want information, you want introductions. You want the right dinner, the right scientist, the right politician, the right investor, the right donor, the right fixer, and you want it all without wasting time. A person who can broker those introductions becomes valuable, even if they are not the smartest financier in the room, because they are selling something more scarce than money: proximity to other powerful humans. This is why influence brokers can get rich. The product is not a spreadsheet. The product is a phone book, plus the ability to make two high-status people feel like meeting was their idea. Done correctly, that looks like magic. Now, if you are an influence broker, your job is to manufacture an environment where people want to show up and where they feel protected while they're there. Epstein did this through what you could call luxury infrastructure, impressive properties, carefully managed events, and an aura of exclusivity. Whether it was a Manhattan townhouse, a Palm Beach residence, international travel, or private gatherings with academics and executives, the common pattern is that the setting signals this is a private world with its own rules. That leads to the third pillar, secrecy as a service. The more powerful someone is, the more they care about privacy, not because all powerful people are criminals, but because reputation is an asset. A single scandal can cost billions in market value, elections, careers, marriages, and legacy. So wealthy people often pay for environments where nothing leaks. The promise is simple. What happens here stays here. In legitimate industries, privacy services exist everywhere. Lawyers, bankers, doctors, security teams, private aviation, NDAs, controlled guest lists. Epstein's world amplified that. It was not just privacy. It was a social system designed to reduce outside scrutiny. Now, here is where the model crosses from shady to dangerous, because Epstein was accused by numerous victims and prosecutors of running a sex trafficking operation involving underage girls. Those allegations are the core of the criminal case and the core of why his story matters. When we talk about business model, we are not saying the crimes were simply part of business. We are saying that according to prosecutors, lawsuits, and extensive reporting, the crimes and the influence machine fed each other. Here is the logic of that feedback loop, described carefully. If someone can get powerful people into private spaces where they believe they are untouchable, then anything compromising that happens in those spaces becomes potential leverage. Whether that leverage is ever used is another question, but the existence of compromise changes behavior. People become cautious. They avoid exposing the host. They rationalize. They downplay. They keep quiet. In short, they protect the system because the system can hurt them. This is why the worse than you think part is not just the allegations themselves. It is the possibility that the structure created incentives for silence across multiple layers of society. And this structure also helps explain something that still shocks people: how Epstein continued to have resources and access even after serious legal trouble. In 2008, Epstein entered a plea deal in Florida involving prostitution-related charges. That deal and the circumstances around it became controversial and widely discussed for years, including criticism that it was unusually lenient compared to the scale of allegations. The important point for our purposes is that after 2008, Epstein was not some unknown. The story was public. Yet for a long time, he still had relationships with institutions and individuals that in a normal world would have run away instantly. So what held the system together? Part of it is the fourth pillar, institutional laundering. When you have money and status, you can wrap yourself in respectable structures. You can donate to universities. You can fund research. You can host intellectual salons. You can attach yourself to philanthropy and science and art. This creates a halo effect. People in respectable fields start repeating the story that you are respectable. And once enough respectable people repeat it, others stop asking questions because asking becomes socially costly. This is not unique to Epstein. It's a general social phenomenon. Prestige is contagious, and in some cases, it is purchased. Another part is the fifth pillar, professional shields. Wealthy people don't just have lawyers, they have networks of lawyers. They don't just have PR, they have crisis PR. They don't just have accountants, they have entire compliance and tax strategies. These are legitimate services when used legitimately, but the effect is the same. Friction is removed, problems are delayed, consequences are negotiated, and the public often sees only the final outcome, not the machinery that produced it. There is also a banking angle that became part of later litigation. Major financial institutions faced lawsuits and regulatory scrutiny related to their relationships with Epstein and what they knew or should have known. Some of those cases ended in large settlements. Again, we don't need to speculate beyond the public record to see the pattern. When a customer is profitable and connected, some institutions tolerate risks they would not tolerate for ordinary people. At this point, you might be thinking, okay, but where did the money come from? How does an influence broker pay for planes, properties, staff, and an elite lifestyle? Here's the honest answer. The complete picture is still not fully transparent to the public, and different sources emphasize different streams. But we can map the plausible categories without inventing facts. There are management fees and financial services for wealthy clients. There are referrals and deal-making where the broker gets compensated. There can be consulting and family office-style arrangements. There can be real estate appreciation, there can be investment returns, and there can be the less visible category, the value of favors, gifts, and non-cash benefits that move through elite networks. In the world of extreme wealth, not everything looks like a paycheck. Sometimes value shows up as access to capital, introductions to opportunities, and ownership structures that are hard for outsiders to track. Now, the last and most unsettling question is the one many people ask. Was Epstein using blackmail? Some former associates and multiple reports have suggested that Epstein liked to collect information and understood how leverage works. There have also been allegations in lawsuits and public commentary about surveillance and hidden recording, though not every claim has been proven in court. The responsible way to frame this is, it is plausible that leverage was part of the environment, because leverage naturally emerges in closed systems where powerful people take risks. But specific claims about who was recorded, where, and how are not something we should state as confirmed unless a court record clearly establishes it. However, even without proven blackmail, you can still get a similar effect through what you might call soft blackmail, the fear that something could leak. If people believe the host controls information, they behave accordingly. The point is not whether a secret file exists. The point is that secrecy itself becomes a tool. That brings us to 2019. Epstein was arrested on federal sex trafficking charges in New York. He died in jail later that year, and the official ruling was suicide, though the circumstances fueled public suspicion and endless debate. His death ended the possibility of a full trial that could have tested evidence publicly and produced a clearer record under oath. And that is another reason the story remains unresolved. The central figure is gone. Many victims never got the courtroom closure they deserved, and the public is left with fragments. So what is the business model in one sentence? It was an influence brokerage that monetized elite access, built credibility through association, sold privacy as a premium product, and, according to prosecutors and accusers, used exploitation and secrecy to increase control and reduce accountability. Now, if you want the practical lesson from this, it's not everyone is evil. The practical lesson is that systems of power have predictable weak points. Weak point 1. People outsource trust. If a respected person vouches for someone, others stop doing due diligence. That is how one sponsor can unlock 100 doors. Weak point 2. Institutions follow incentives. If someone generates revenue, donations, prestige, or connections, the institution often tolerates discomfort. That's why whistleblowers are ignored, and red flags get reinterpreted as complicated. Weak point 3. Privacy can become a shield. In elite spaces, privacy is normal, but the more privacy you add, the more you reduce accountability. If there is no sunlight, the worst behavior grows. Weak point 4. Reputational laundering works. If you can attach yourself to science, philanthropy, and culture, you can buy time. You can delay consequences. You can make critics look impolite for asking questions. Weak point 5. Legal outcomes are not always proportional. Ordinary people experience the law as a hard wall. Powerful people often experience the law as a negotiation. That gap is where cynicism is born. And finally, the most important lesson. The story is not just about one man. It is about a class of relationships. When a person becomes a hub for elite secrets and elite desires, they become protected by the very people who should be most cautious around them. That's how a system like this survives for years. If you want a simple mental image, think of it like a private club. Membership is status, entry is controlled, the rules are unwritten. Everyone thinks they are safe because everyone else is important. And the host is the one person who knows everyone's weak spots. That is not just wealth, that is power. And that is why Epstein's business model is worse than you think. Because if the incentives exist, the model can exist, even if the name changes. If you take anything from this video, let it be this. Whenever you see a person who seems to have unlimited access without a clear, transparent source of value, ask what they are really selling. If it's not skill, and it's not a product, it might be people, it might be secrets. And in the world of power, those are the most expensive commodities of all.